Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Northeastern President Joseph Aoun.
Good morning, or good afternoon. I'm in a different time zone. We're delighted to be here, and Tim Stevenson, thank you for hosting us today here at Intel, and thank you for all the panelists and the moderator. We're very happy to be here. Some of you, have asked me, so what's the purpose of the Women Who Inspire? Even Kim asked me this question. The idea is very simple. You know, and I will not bore you with numbers, but you know that the majority of college-bound students now are female, 70% in the nation. Guess how many are in the STEM fields? STEM, science, technology, engineering, and management. 10%. What percentage? 24.
24.
24. So clearly there is an issue of pipeline. And the pipeline has to start very early on. At the age of, when they go to school, even before high school. But then there is also a responsibility that universities have to assume during college, but also after college. And so far, higher education has focused on two groups. The 18 to 22, BA, BS degrees, and we have many students who are here doing their co-ops in California, I salute you. But also, higher education has focused on the PhD, but we haven't focused on lifelong learning. How does it mesh with the Women Who Inspire? How does it mesh with the fact that we have a paucity of women in the tech industry and, frankly, in many other industries? The answer is very simple. Our responsibility does not stop when the students graduate. So there are opportunities, and we have to really work on them. One of the opportunities that we're exploring is to bring now students who finish a BS or a BA degree. From any college, they have to pass an entrance exam, and then industry will give them the co-ops, namely the long-term internships, and we will give them the masters. That's what we did with Amazon to create a new pipeline for computer science, but we want to focus on women. And no university has done that, bring exclusively women to create a new pipeline. And also what we want to do is bring back the women who left the workplace and who really achieved a lot, took a hiatus, but didn't have the opportunity to come back, or don't have the opportunity to come back. So we have special programs that we're putting together, and stay tuned, you're going to hear about them. But then the question becomes, if you are doing it, where are you going to do it? Well, we're going to do it everywhere. We're not going to do it in Boston. Some of you know that we have a presence, a graduate campus in Seattle and Charlotte. Stay tuned, because at some point, very soon, we will be present here in California. So the whole idea is that your concept of a university, you go to the university, is not enough. The university has to come to you, and that's why we're here today. And what about our panelists? It's very simple. They are the models that we want the students, people in the workplace, and people who are contemplating coming back to the workplace to see how far they can go. And that's why we are very excited to have this distinguished panel. Thank you all for being here, and this will be one of many that we will be doing here in the Bay Area. And thank you all once again, and thank you, Kim, and I want to thank you for those things. Without further ado, Mr. Moderator.
So my name is Jim Dolce, and I am the CEO of a cybersecurity company based in San Francisco in the city. It's called Lookout. And I'm also the parent of a class of 18 student at Northeastern. His name is Alex. And I'm your moderator for this evening. So let me do a quick introduction. We have 3 distinguished panelists with us this evening. On my far right, Michelle Dennedy, who is the Vice President and Chief Privacy Officer at McAfee. Next to her is Kim Stevenson, who is Corporate VP and CIO here at Intel, and a 1985 graduate of Northeastern School of Business. And right to my near right here is Seval, who is the CEO of Continental Intelligent Transportation Systems. We'll call that ITS this evening. And an expert here in vehicle networking and automation. An interesting tidbit here is she was previously head of global strategic partnerships for Google's self-driving cars. So I think will be a very interesting conversation tonight. And a word about the audience before I begin. We have a very diverse group of registrants here. I looked over the registration list. We have a great show of support from Intel and McAfee, of course. We have a contingency here from Lookout, who traveled all the way from San Francisco in 101 traffic this evening. Apple, VMware, Cisco, IDT, and a number of prominent Silicon Valley companies, as well as faculty, staff, and students of Northeastern. So welcome everybody, and I hope you enjoy the session this evening. I have an opening question just to get things started instead of going over biographies. Each of the biographies of our panelists are in your program this evening. But let me just ask a question beginning with Michelle. Michelle, tell us briefly, how did you get to where you are today? Tell us a bit about your journey from perhaps graduating from college to where you are sitting here this evening.
Okay, so it was a long and winding road, so I'll try to make it as short a journey as possible. So I went to the Ohio State University as an undergraduate and got a BS degree there. I really focused on brain anatomy. My senior thesis was in self-efficacy and how thought processes within the brain and learning processes within the brain could actually fundamentally change biological systems as a matter of will. And in doing so, I did some research in a special education group at Ohio State using a robotic Ricoh arm and an Apple IIe Plus, remember those? Nice black screen with green type on it. And we adapted it. Everything was bespoke code at that point, probably mostly in BASIC, maybe a tiny bit of Pascal. And we adapted the code so that it was a Ricoh arm. And so basically my job as an 18-year-old kid was to teach these handicapped kids how to do science. So we'd pick up beakers and mix. And what I found, and I promise the rest of the journey won't be this long, but this kind of set me on my path. Each child, and these were all paraplegic and quadriplegic children of variant types of injuries and organic issues going on with them, each one of them learned the 17-stroke sequence that invoked the bug in the code that would cause the arm to react and actually go back and reset. And what happens if you have a beaker of liquid typically and glass in your arm and you are a Ricoh arm, it does this. And the liquid goes everywhere and the glass goes everywhere and there's liquid on what was then probably $1 million setup. Every other adult in the room is freaking out and looking around, and there's me, 18-year-old kid, staring at a child who never has a chance to play or interact, and we laughed. And to me, that's the kind of central theme of my entire career, which is the magic that happens when man and machine and innovation come together. The self-efficacy that was learned and the organic changes that happened when these children were given the tools to actually live a better life, even incrementally better, a life that none of us would choose for our children, but an incrementally better life. And so I went on from there, I got a law degree, I went into patents, did mostly biomedical stuff, and kind of tripped over this crazy and for all the ladies in the room, like really nice abs and a nice summer fling sometimes turns into 20 years, a minivan and 2 children. So I caution you now, I was in New York City and that's what happened to me. So now I moved out to the East Coast and tripped into the bubble, and Sun Microsystems was hiring. And I was a patent litigator at the time, and Scott McNeely had famously said, "You have absolutely zero privacy," and topped it off with a hearty "get over it" at a press conference. So no one who was anyone actually wanted the privacy issue. And so me being a patent person and a young person and a crazy person who cares about people and the instantiation of technology and the people, I ran toward the disaster. And so that's when I really became involved in data privacy and protection. After 9/11, I had a 6-day-old daughter on my knee and promised her I would fix the internet. So that's what I've been doing ever since, really, and taking privacy. I left legal in 2002 to create a business unit at Sun because I looked at all of our products in Solaris and cloud and what we now call the Internet of Things. We called ambient computing back then. We'll call it something next week. But all of those things touch employees and people and even the systems administrators who deal with those systems, as well as national security issues for many, many nation states. So that was kind of my thing, and I did that until Sun ended and Larry Ellison acquired us. And I said, please, I have a nice package, everyone leave me alone, until the salespeople came calling. So here I am. At that point, I was Chief Governance Officer for Cloud Computing, an information strategist for Sun. I don't know how to sell things. I don't know how to be a salesperson. And basically, the Oracle people said, "Oh, honey, we're Oracle. We know how to sell things." So I did sales for a year. And my goal was to ask people why they weren't buying secure products. What is it about this market that makes you not spend your money? What is it about how you get your budget? And so I visited 1,500 customers in that 1 year, and I got a lot of answers that I'm trying to solve now. So I left Oracle, went on my own for a little bit, and then stumbled into McAfee, who needed a privacy officer and program manager. And that's where I am today. And as I've been also at McAfee, I do 2 other things on the side, maybe 3. One is a site called the Identity Project to educate parents about identity theft in children. And then I also wrote a book with my father called The Privacy Engineer's Manifesto about using UML tools and technologies to build privacy into systems. And I teach at Carnegie Mellon. So it's a bit of a winding road, but it's all kind of interrelated back to that first experience.
I think it's a lesson to the students in the audience. You can't plan your career, it just happens. So, Kim, can you tell us about your journey?
Sure. So I was a co-op student at Northeastern, and I co-opted at IBM my entire time. And I was a co-op student on Friday. I went back I graduated on Saturday, and on Monday I was a full-time employee. So I never interviewed, other than the co-op interview. And I started in IBM Finance, and I did financial systems work. And so in those days, you taught yourself, financial systems were not very stable in those days, so you taught yourself a lot of lessons because the people that worked in the data center thought I worked second shift because I was always there late at night. And I was also young, so I taught myself to program so that I could do job scheduling and not have to be there, and then I could go out at night instead of being in the data center with the data center team. And that's kind of how I got into systems work I didn't like accounting, and this was even before Sarbanes-Oxley, because there's like too many rules in accounting. I liked it as a course, but I didn't really like it as a career, and I liked the systems work a lot better. So I did lots of different financial systems, and I eventually, after 16 years at IBM, with a great career in finance, I decided you can't really be a senior executive in a company, which is what I wanted to be. I wanted to be a general manager. If you don't know anything about the customer, and having worked 16 years in finance, I'd never met a customer. And I decided that it was time I made a change. So I moved from finance into marketing for a very struggling division, ran to the problem, and nobody wanted the job. So I said, well, I'd love the job. And I spent that first year, I decided, since I don't know anything about customers or what they think, I was going to get out on the road and I was going to listen to them. And I met with 250 different user groups in 1 year. So it was, I said, I ate every Holiday Inn, every chicken dinner. I mean, I ate, and I listened and I listened and I listened until I understood what their problems were and how I would bring that back into I had marketing and engineering, into my engineering team, and then we were going to engineer products that address their problems. And that was a fundamental shift in how I thought about the work I did and what I wanted to do. So a couple of years later, then I had the opportunity to leave. I was recruited to leave. And if you grew up, when I grew up, like the idea of leaving an IBM caliber company, it just crushed my parents. And I'm like, really? I think I'll make more money. It'll be good. And so then I go to EDS. I left. And the first day I was there, they announced, I started on September 16th. And September 30th was the end of the quarter. And on September 16th, they announced they were going to miss earnings by 80%. That's only 2 weeks away. How can you be that far off? I mean, I grew up in IBM finance. I was really thinking, oh my God, what did I do? But again, sort of, people got really, this is a time where when your the stock went down, almost 90%, and it bounced back a little bit, but it was still down. People's 401ks were wiped out. Their personal stock holdings were wiped out. And so half of the people in the company sort of retreated, and very few people were going to go try to be part of fixing the problem. And so I just decided then that I was going to be part of fixing the problem. And we did have a lot of problems because those misses don't happen, they happen for a reason. So over the next 7 years, my career just skyrocketed because I was one of my colleagues said to me, "Why are you always willing to step into the middle of traffic?" And I was like, well, why aren't you willing to step into the middle of the traffic? Because that's how problems get solved. Then we were bought. I had bought a lot of companies at IBM and at EDS, and buying companies is a lot more fun than being bought. And so at that point, I came to Intel, and so it's just really exciting time. So, and I'll just tell you, to Jim's point, that I never wanted to be the CIO. I never said that was my goal. In fact, when I started, there wasn't even a position called the CIO. The role of CIO was only coined in the late 80s, and I started work in 1985. So, this industry changes. That's the cool thing about technology. It changes really fast, and it's impacting every aspect of our lives and the way companies work and everything. And I knew that early on. I worked on the very first, what was to be the very first portable PC. It was 26 pounds. We had to nickel plate every bit of it because it had so much interference. And it didn't have a battery, but we called it portable. We put it on a little wheelie thing and we strapped it on and we would take it home. But I knew that would change the world. And so it's kind of, that was my very first product that I was the industrial engineer on, and to hear where the heart of all of that happened. So anyways, it feels like a really good circle for me.
So thank you. When I talk to young people about their careers, the one thing that comes back all the time is I want to do something really cool. Seval, I guess I have to say that working on Google's self-driving cars is pretty cool. And I'm sure the work you're doing at ITS is very similar to what you were doing at Google. So why don't you tell us how you got such a cool job?
God, I was hoping you wouldn't ask me about my career path. So I'm going to take a slightly detour from my colleagues on explaining my history and how I fell into this role. But I think if you can think a little bit about what I'm saying, you'll see that there are patterns that resonate between what Michelle and Kim were saying and what I'll be telling you about as well. I think first of all, let me just say it's really exciting to see all the women in the room. And I just want to say thank you very much for coming out to listen to us, because as much as it's exciting for you to listen to us, it's also very rewarding for us to be sitting here and sharing some of our past life experiences, because I think only through shared experiences do we really mobilize and gain momentum, especially in this movement that Jim's been referring to. So I went to Wellesley College, which was a women's college, and MIT, and graduated with a degree in economics and finance, and then headed off to Wharton. My closest, face-to-face with computer science was a very famous computer science teacher right now at Stanford, Eric Roberts, and I had a rift about using our sorority house at Wellesley College as a makeshift computer lab for his computer engineering courses when we were trying to pull it away for our literary events. So the quirky keyboard and I just had a brief, kind of a respite at the time, but it was nothing more than that, I assure you. But going from Wharton, heading kind of towards the world of Wall Street, which is what I fell into, again, by nothing else but by the mere fact that I didn't like consulting, and I didn't like working for the UN, and I didn't like one or two other job opportunities that I had during the summers. And by the way, part of your process of wanting to figure out what you want is figuring out what you don't want, and kind of, sort of selective kind of association. But I ended up on Wall Street, and the fifth or sixth day out of the training program, the market crashes, just similar to what you experienced. And the head of the trading desk at Salomon Brothers, which was at this time the leader in arbitrage, index futures arbitrage, which is a binomial pricing model that we had worked out on Sun Microstations, and at that time had been using that to sort of buy the forward index and short against the spot index, knowing that these would converge. It was kind of financial modeling. He went around the room and he said, "Who wants to go to Japan?" Because we knew intuitively that Japan would open down 50%. So nobody wanted to get on a plane to go to Japan that night. Everybody had things to do, and of course I was a young kid on the block, and I was told, "Oz, get on a plane and go." When I went home, packed, and I was on a flight to Tokyo Narita, 3 hours later. So the next 5 years, I ended up in Japan, and I ended up learning about building systems and basically building companies and building businesses for large financial institutions. And that led to my next role and being more and more involved with building businesses in South America, privatizations, and then eventually ended up in technology, which was a quote-unquote new business. So Solomon led to Merrill Lynch led to hedge fund management led to technology, ended up in Silicon Valley, in the heart of Silicon Valley in the booming 1999s. So while I was here, again, recreating oneself is trying to learn technology, kind of was like running and tying my shoelaces at the same time, trying to apply everything I had learned all along the last 15 years of financial training and modeling and business development, and learning that in as much as there was very strong technology here, the concept of fusing technology and business was not really working in a way that allowed great technology breakthroughs to occur in certain areas where I felt we should be getting more traction. And a large degree of it was because engineering and business development and sort of partnerships, and a lot of this doesn't really synchronize as well as it probably should. But that's an opportunity. Remember, in every time, in friction, there's a lot of friction in environments purely because there's reason and opportunity for people to take advantage of that and to create other opportunities. So I took the position that, look, I couldn't code and I couldn't do things that would revolutionize the shortest path to debugging. So why not try and create business models in which these people can bring these technologies alive? And I built a company. We sold it to Google. Again, like him, I didn't want to join a 30,000 person company, and all of a sudden, opportunity comes knocking at my door when Eric Schmidt says, "Hey, we got this little science project on the side. I think you'd be interested in it." And I come in, I interview with Google X, I fall in love with it. I said, "I want that project right there," which was a self-driving car project, and the rest is history. So I won't bore you with the details, but I mean, what really attracted me to the project is my passion to want to then see a new generation of technology and feel like I had an impact and an ability to do that. So I think to some degree that's what brought me to my role at Continental, which ended up being one of the partners that we worked with very closely to create next generational systems in the vehicle, critical inverter, motor, steering, braking systems. So At Continental right now, my responsibility is largely to build next generational technologies that will change the way you mobilize yourselves. And if you think about mobility, it's nothing more than moving from point A to point B. And the fact that we've had this ownership model of vehicles and relying on combustion engineers, all of this is really behind us right now. Right now, the future is about the fact that the first kiss that teenagers have don't take place in the back seat of a car. They don't take place in the front seat of a car. In fact, they don't take place in a car at all. They take place probably with a virtual mock-up from their phone app, where they're kissing their phone. So talking about how our lives have changed is one of the things that I would like to just pull in from my colleagues is we build technology for people, not for machines. And one of the places where women can really make a huge impact is the fact that women know and love relationships. We're good at it, we're good at sharing this energy, and it's all about the ability to raise that to a level where we have that very special connection with machines.
I was just going to say men suck at relationships, but...
I didn't say that. I didn't say that.
Another example, though, fascinating journey, and another example is that you don't plan your career in advance. I think it just happens along the way. And I know that a lot of college students today like to sort of plan things out and structure what their career is going to look like. And all the planning in the world is probably a waste of time. Just let it happen. So we have about an hour left here, and what we're going to do is get into the meat of the conversation.
Can I counter? So I don't agree with that. So just to counter that, I have always had a 5-year plan. I have changed my 5-year plan as often as I could because I learned something else. I'm more interested in that, but I do think you need a career plan. I think you also need to be flexible enough to adjust as you go, because things don't happen randomly. You have to pursue your goals, and when you pursue them and you build a track record of success, people want you on the best projects and stuff. So it's not quite so don't worry about your career, don't plan it, but my opinion is you do need to plan it, and you need to be flexible enough to take the opportunities when they come and take a little risk here and there with those opportunities.
But I think what equally important is, I think all three of us sort of like the idea and have adopted the idea of throwing the football where the receiver is going as opposed to where he is. And I've kind of looked at relationships always as 4-year plans. So my kind of adoption curve for my employment sort of concept or career concept has always been 4 years. Because I feel like my threshold for boredom or my threshold for wanting to sort of move on to something new at the end of 4 years is part and parcel with who we are, right? We like to reinvent ourselves, or we like to move on to another interesting opportunity. So I agree 100%, 4-year, 5-year, 3-year, whatever it is, but please, for God's sake, throw the ball where the receiver is going and not for where he is, because you might find yourself in a position where you're behind the curve, and that's a frustrating experience.
Okay, so content. We have 4 topics that we're going to cover tonight in the next 50 minutes. Disruptive technologies. We are here in Silicon Valley, the heart of disruption. Disruptive technologies and future trends is one of our topics. We're going to talk about the war for talent. You can't be talking about disruptive technologies happening here in Silicon Valley and not address the war for talent and the implications of that on businesses. We're going to talk about leadership, and finally careers, specifically about mentoring. So I'm going to start with disruptive technologies and future trends. I'm going to talk a bit first about some top technology trends in Silicon Valley, and then ask some questions. I picked 3 trends for us to talk about tonight. First one is the Internet of Things. We are seeing more and more technology in our homes. Traditionally, it's been tablets and smartphones and set-top boxes and game consoles, and it's moving into cameras and door locks and Nest thermostats and smoke detectors. And all of this stuff is interconnected and integrated with the cloud and exchanging data and storing data in the cloud. Internet of Things, topic number 1. The second topic is what I call data-driven healthcare. In the past year, 70 million people purchased whether a Jawbone Up, a Fitbit Flex, a Nike Fuel Band. Everybody is now collecting health information, sending that health information into the cloud, and services in the cloud, Google Fit, Microsoft Health, Apple Health, these services which collect the data promise to perform some meaningful analysis on the data and give us information back. And then the third area, which I call the last second economy. Having moved to San Francisco about a year ago, first thing I did was download my Uber app. I don't have an automobile. I don't need an automobile living in the city. I use Uber to get around if I'm not walking. Somebody told me about Postmates, which I think is a great app. I can just order online and someone shows up my door 30 minutes later. I buy my groceries through Amazon Fresh and just go online through an app and do my weekly shopping. Everything comes to me. It's that last second economy. And so if we look at these technology trends, whether it's IoT, data-driven healthcare, last second economy, the big question, which I'll start with Kim, how do we manage the risks associated with these technologies? Do we really want our home connected, and do we really want all this information about us stored in the cloud? And what do we do about the risks associated with that?
Well, so I would say first is there's as much risk to do nothing as there is to do something. So businesses are being decimated by other businesses that have adopted disruptive technology and brought to market a new business model, a new market niche, whatever. And you've seen music stores have gone, right? The self-driving cars and the Uber, automobile manufacturers are the ones that should be worried, not just taxi drivers, right? And these are fundamental secular shifts. So now you say, okay, so all right, then I should go do this disruptive technology. How am I going to do that? And I've always believed that there is a safe place to do everything. What your job is when you're thinking about deploying it is, are you deploying it in a safe place first so that you can scale it quickly? You learn enough from a small deployment to move quickly. And that deployment could be your end users, your customers, much, much more today than ever. The end user is involved in the creation of the technology or the service. And you're going to see that continue to grow, whether it's in the maker community or whether it's user-centered innovation, that what we're consumers are now part of a maker community that helps you build better products. So, and I am the CIO, so I do have to mention cybersecurity. And all this Internet of Things comes with a concept around data, who owns the data, that is not completely rationalized in the world today. There's lots of movement to protect it, but ownership of it and who has the right to monetize that data, it's not all rationalized yet. Those are some of the big challenges, though, that get to be figured out in the next decade.
So Michelle, I mean, we do have a privacy expert here on the panel, so we're not going to let you get away without answering this question. Speak to us about the privacy implications of all this data collection, and should we be worried that this very personal information is stored there in the cloud?
Yes, you should. So I think of the Internet of Things, and again, like this is my background. The Internet of Things is I've heard people call it the intimates of things or the identity of things. I think that's a little more appropriate because a thing is just a thing. It's when it interacts with systems, with people, and does things. But before we go into the privacy aspects, and I could go on for quite some time about that, I want to talk about just the word disruptive, because you cannot disrupt a delighted customer. Have you ever tried to get your mother to change her hairstyle? Can't be done. She's happy with it. It looks like a beehive. We called my grandma Grandma Blue here for 98 years. Cannot be disrupted. All of this disruption in the marketplace is because we have issues that we think we can do better. We have markets that want to be driven in a certain direction. We have conveniences that we want to have. We have innovative and creative thoughts. So I like to think of disruptive markets as really more creative and accretive markets than purely just shoving things away. And I think it was Henry Ford, who said that had I asked my consumers what they wanted, they would have said a faster horse. The problem was solved in a much more creative, disruptive way. So that's my little mantra on disruption, because it sounds like such a mean word. And I think it's actually a very creative and exciting word to create and have a creative methodology. So privacy, I just want a quick definition of privacy, because I think the biggest issue that we have with privacy and ownership and our relationship to the intimacy of things or the identity of things is that we think that privacy equals not being naked. So privacy equals encryption, privacy equals secrecy, privacy equals not. And that's not true. The functional definition of privacy is the FAIR, and there's FAIR principles that go back into the 1960s and much further back into Magna Carta even in our society. So we have big data about what's fair. So it's the fair and authorized processing of personally identifiable data. So you can unpack that definition for a long period of time, but the point of it is that you can actually take apart what sounds like a social concept, which sounds like a squishy, hidden, bad thing that is antithetical to new business, and instead you say, okay, the authorized, how do we do that? You can't necessarily authorize a light bulb, but once that data rolls down and becomes what's going on at Michelle's house, I can have an authorized discussion with my utility company, or I can have an authorized discussion with my supplier, GE, or whomever. So you can think about that. Processing is ripe for innovation. We rarely delete data because we think it's some sort of exhaust, rather than looking at it as a valuable commodity that can help us actually create relationships with customers and employees. So thinking about all those layers of processing in the Internet of Things, and then fairness is not fair. To me, is contextual. So I said years ago, and I've been misquoted on this, so I want to set the record straight. I said in 2000 that data is the new oil. And what is never quoted is I said, but it's not. I finished that statement. This is in Brussels. I was talking to the Data Commissioners Conference, and I said it's not like oil at all, because it's just dead dinosaur. A molecule of oil is a molecule of oil. What it is it's a currency. And it's time-based, and it's contextually based, and it's purpose-driven. So if you look at the new market for IoT data, then you have really creative processes that can happen. You have hedge funds. What would it cost for you to know what my data is? This is actually not making me any skinnier. My wearable device is pants. And I'm not wearing them today, but they're quite tight. This doesn't make me any thinner, but it does give me information that can potentially spur action or create a competitive market with my other jawbone friends. So I think privacy, if you look at it operationally and if you break down that definition, you can begin to create what I call the metric system for privacy. When the metric system was invented, a yard of fabric in Paris was different than a yard in Lyon, and you couldn't trade. Right now, we have trade barriers with privacy due to all of these lumpy laws and this notion that it means secrecy or somehow state identity. And instead, I think we can come to a mathematical conclusion that we can say our users actually get to decide in context. And we can give them controls along the various segments where information is processed, where it becomes a really dynamic and exciting thing. And it's not just yes or no or signing a bunch of legal terms and conditions. It's really participating in a market. So I said I could go on for a while, but that's all I'll give you for now.
So on the topic of disruptive technology, I've looked a bit at what ITS is doing. Can you, Seval, tell us what disruptive technology that you're involved with today?
Well, I'm a little depressed because for 10 years I've been quoting Michelle saying data is the new 21st century. Oil.
It's currency. You're a finance woman.
Now I got to change all my presentation decks, so it's just headaches. Thanks. Actually, it's a great metaphor because it really is the currency. And when it comes down to what's going on in mobility, just as a segue for your discussion. it's really not about data ownership. Everybody likes to think it is, especially the car manufacturers. It's really about data access, right? Because as Michelle eloquently said, data enables us to, as a currency, provide utility, functionality, and revenue in some cases back and forth across different content providers, different originators, and even you as a consumer. So this is the single most important feature of having the ability to probe in-vehicle data is making and revolutionizing the way we think about transportation. So whether it's a vehicle that you own, or whether it's a vehicle that you share, or whether it's a vehicle that you lease, it's about the ability to have data from the vehicle change the way you transact, mobilize, and own or not own, for that matter, the vehicle. So this is something that's really exciting and has formed the platform for this disruption, creative disruption, to occur, coupled with the fact that the Internet of Everything, as I call it, because I don't think it's really interesting to like have two pairs of shoes talk to each other if they don't really communicate. But what we're having is, with cheap sensors and with fast processing, with storage capabilities, we're actually having platforms starting to talk to each other that never did. I mean, how cool is it if you leave your home and 15 minutes later you get a display rendering message on your HMI, on your vehicle display, that says, by the way, you've left the perimeter of the geofencing location. Did you know that you left your garage door open? Because the sensor talks to the vehicle, knows it's left a certain distance, and can activate an alert to you, or push an alert to you, which you can respond interactively and say, yes, I would like to close my garage door, or no, my husband's in the house doing some work in there. This is the kind of really exciting communication. The vehicle is becoming the next generation communication platform, whether we like it or not, because people want it to occur. People want this convenience. People want the timeliness, the speed, and the ability to have a car in its stationary form for 23 hours of the day, because the average person uses their car for an hour. So sitting in there, in its park position, just like a smartphone sitting here next to me can be a beautiful object. It can also do a lot of things while it's stationary, because of this thing called connecting the vehicle. The vehicle connectivity now is enabling the next generation of creative disruption, because now vehicles can actually start to do clever things. They can be receptors of packages. You can remotely access your vehicle, lock and unlock your vehicle while you're sitting at work to have flowers delivered to it. There's a multitude of services that are going to be built off the backbone of this creative technology coming through and our ability to link. What does it mean? It means there's going to be a lot of new players coming into the industry, a lot of fragmentation of the industry, a lot of the names traditional automotive. I showed a chart the other day. It was kind of like one of these big bubble charts that you show in quant class, showing all these new, and people kept asking me, who's that, and what do they do, and how are they adding? These people are all coming in with their respective technologies, and they're owning or trying to own pieces of the value chain. So naturally, if you're sitting around as a traditional OE or a tier 1 or tier 2 supplier, you better be darn sure that the market's being encroached on. You have Apple, you have Google, the new consumer electronics coming through tethered and mirror-linked approaches, rendering onto the display. What is the fight is for who can get access to the data, because the data enables you to communicate things back and forth, which enhances revenue channels. So enabling technology of lighting up the cars or lighting up transportation, having all the sensor capability embedded into the vehicle. So now the vehicle has cameras, it has radars, it has LiDARs, so it can actually know at any given point where it is, not only on a map, but on the road within 2 or 3 inches of accuracy through precision, high precision GPS. These are enabling the vehicle to be very, very intelligent. And for God's sakes, I mean, look what happened when autopilot was introduced to the airline industry. Computers ought to be driving vehicles. 90% of of accidents or crashes, accidents actually don't exist, crashes are caused by human error, right? And sure, there's going to be a difficult period where you have manual driving and automated driving existing on the same roads. But I do believe that we have to start thinking of computer driving our vehicles and creating those necessary levels of intelligence that are only just starting right now as we're here. And I wish I could live to maybe 100 or 130 so I can see really this whole thing come into fruition, because it probably is going to take, you know, much longer than we thought. But it's a really exciting time to be alive and to be part of this.
So there's a term that is called digital disintermediation. You know, startups are invading every industry, every sector. Financial services has been invaded by startups. We've got startup investment management firms, Betterment and Wealthfront. We've got peer-to-peer lending models now. You no longer have to go to a bank to get that loan. You go to Lending Club and you make a connection between a lender and someone who is looking for that loan. We've got mobile payment, digital wallet services. What's the next large traditional industry that's ready to be disrupted by a mobile-focused startup? Michelle, do you have any ideas?
So if I had to pick, well, so I am out-financed by a lot. So this is probably not the industry that can pay for it all, but I would say health. I think health is, and health, I don't just mean doctor's visits, I mean wellness as well as traditional health services. I think it's one of the most human problems that we have, obviously, most ubiquitous problem that we have, and probably one, and I think I would only second that with education, that is so rife for, there's been so much scholarly work that is not associated with auto processing. So I'll give you an example. So there's a company called CellWorks. And basically what they do is they just hire really cheap talent from other countries to evaluate the scientific literature and help build models so that researchers can start to target their next phase of research that much faster based on really hard, true, real science. That's where we're at today. We have cheap labor typing in stuff, and that's called innovation for research. So I think there's a ton of room for not just the connected body and self and analytics, it's really how do we make better decisions for the type of health that we want to have and the kind of, you know, what does that mean to the rest of the world? So I'll share another personal nugget of myself. I have multiple sclerosis, so I'm very obsessed with the whole person. So 10 years ago, I was blind in an eye and walking with a cane, and I had to self-search for the right solution. And that's not like groovy, like tantric yoga or anything, but it took a lot of doing and a lot of self-motivation. And I'm a fairly well-educated person in probably one of the best situations on the planet. That doesn't happen if you're in many parts of the planet. So not just health innovation for us here in the US or in the organized kind of nations, but also where things are quite dark. And there's so much natural talent and resource that we've yet to tap as a planet.
So if you are a student and a budding entrepreneur, you should be looking at healthcare and health services for the next disruptive technology. Did you all get that? Did you all write that down?
It's not a great market.
So I'm going to move on to the next topic, the war for talent. Silicon Valley is engaged in a war for talent on a scale that is sort of unseen since the dot-com boom in 1999, 2000 timeframe. More companies are being funded every day, and those that are funded are growing and looking for more talent. The demand for talent has outstripped the supply for talent. And so an expanding and developing STEM workforce is a critical issue for our industry and even for our country. We need to churn out more college graduates in STEM fields. And the effort needs to start with women. You heard President Aoun say that only 24% of those who attend college are in STEM-related fields. Studies show that high school girls are achieving the same level as boys in math and science by many measures. So what is the reason that we don't have 50% of our college students in technology, girls versus boys. And there's been a lot of research, again, as was alluded to. The critical moment when young women turn away from STEM is probably not even at that point where they're considering college. Some of the studies show that it happens as early as in junior high school. And it's all about what kinds of influences both parents and the environment that they're in are placing on them to try to persuade them to get into STEM and to stay in STEM-related fields all the way up to and through college and even beyond and graduate level activities. So one of the questions that I'll throw out to the panel, Kim, what does the role of parents have to play to help girls reach their potential in STEM?
So I do think that the parents play a role in, and I'll say, creating visibility into what's possible for children. We did a study a few years ago about engineers, right? So what did young children think about engineers? And we're kind of, we think they're really special people, engineers. So it turned out that girls mostly thought that engineers were like train engineers or a sanitation engineer, or except in homes where one of the parents was an engineer. And so we simply started saying, did you know engineers could make 6 figures within a few short years of working? And all of a sudden, people were more interested in engineering. And so you don't have to be an engineer to understand. It's really not. It's more than engineers. It could be computer science. It could be, but to understand what's possible. And I always think that the parents' role is to, expose your children to different opportunities and help them pursue the path that they choose. And so there's no right or wrong answer when you're young. Every experience in your life is building a base by which you can make the next set of decisions. So it's not wrong to want to be something now and change later. And I think parents just help children think about those options in the broadest possible way.
Thank you. Seval, you're the CEO of your company, so tell us your point of view on how companies can create a stronger, more diverse pipeline of talent.
Hiring women CEOs. Women have to ask for it too, right? I mean, women have to be in a position where women are very, very productive, and I think that as we see, and as it's been written about in books, and data sets have been created, and state departments have been working on this, and there's some initiatives. Women in the workforce and women executives in the workforce are directly correlated with the GDP increase per capita in that country. That's a known fact that's been followed and watched very, very carefully, to the point that now there is a bit of affirmative action quota being written and being developed in mainly starting in the European, Scandinavian, and Australian and subcontinent, where women now have to be on public boards of public companies. So I don't know if we all agree with quotas. I'm not really a big fan of quotas, but I do think we need to get some sort of a reset, and this is not a bad way to do it. And I'm seeing it happening in the workforce. So I think there's some pressure being put on public companies to have women on the boards. The question now is, how do you have women that are leaders in their fields get to a level where they actually are recognized as senior executives? And I think to some degree the onus is on women to make sure they ask for that. And it's not easy to ask for that because we become complacent, and women aren't great at asking for, promotions or asking for more pay increases, et cetera. And traditionally we have not been in a position to ask for those. So one of the most important things is to find other women to be able to promote and to be able to continue to foster that diversity. I'll give you an example. At Continental, I just attended the Senior Executive Convention which was 400 fairly rowdy German engineers in a room about 4 times the size of this, and they had just hired the first woman for the supervisory board, which was a woman that had 15 years of HR responsibility at Volkswagen, now is serving on the supervisory board at Continental. And she talked very, very strongly and with a lot of gravitas about the importance of bringing women in, and diversity, not just women, but diversity into automotive, because there are mega trends happening right now, as my peers were discussing, and women can see these and act differently. You know, if women were involved in the decisions behind a seatbelt, I'm sure we wouldn't have a seatbelt that crisscrossed our chest line the way it does in a fairly barbaric way. If women had been involved with where to put a cup holder in a car, I wouldn't have put it in the center dash where my 11-year-old is constantly fiddling up and changing the dial and spills coffee almost every other morning. I would have probably found a place to put on the left-hand side of the vehicles, which now you're seeing in some more sort of more inventive creations. So there's lots of other opportunities for women to become much more involved in contributing to historically male-dominated industries. So I think, in answer to your question, I see the responsibility partly as a woman executive to bring other women up, serve as role models, mentors, and continue to network and provide networking opportunities like this one here, where we are in a position to network and see women coming in through the ceilings and be able to do something creative about that in a positive way. One last note I'll leave you with: at Google, we sponsored a study trying to understand why we were stuck at this god-awful 17% of women or engineers in the company, and this is pretty much of a fixed number that doesn't seem to change year after year after year. And one of the studies showed something very interesting, and I think I shared this with some of you before the conversation today, that women who don't get interviewed by women in their first round of interviews don't get the second round. How interesting, right? So once they are interviewed by a woman and they get the second round, the correlation dropped off on the regressions. So it wasn't so important. But if women weren't interviewed by women for the first round, chances are they never made it to the second round. So think about that a little bit, and think about how we can start to adopt challenges and rules and principles and best practices in our own work that can foster sort of a more balanced association with results.
Thank you. Kim, I have to turn to you again. Here is the Intel representative. Intel recently announced a $300 million initiative aimed at boosting workforce diversity at the company, and I assume in the industry overall. Can you tell us more about your company's Diversity in Technology initiative?
Yeah, so that was a bold move by the company with a goal that by 2020 we'll be at parity across all our diverse categories, women being just one of the diversity groups. And so we've looked at our data, and we know that we do a reasonably good job hiring at parity to the market available skills. But we have to do a better job, so we've got some focus on improving our hiring. But progression and retention is a big issue for us in terms of the more senior you go, the further it drops off. And so we call it, the leaky pipe. But then we have to build a broader pipeline. We need almost all the STEM areas. We have to grow the pipeline. So those are the areas that the $300 million fund is invested in, with this whole goal that by 2020 we will dramatically change the dynamics and the demographics of our workforce. So very bold statement, and we're going to have to be creative because we've been working on this and we haven't made a lot of progress. So I think we also see some experimentation as we go.
Okay, thank you. So we're going to move on to the third topic, 3 of 4, and that is leadership. Michelle, I'll ask you the first question here. What was the toughest business decision you've had to make in the last few years?
Oh gosh, there's so many. I mean, whenever you have to lay someone off, that's always emotionally the toughest. I think I'll point to something that is was tough, but one of my most proud moments. So this is back at a different company, and we were given a proposal by a country that we do a lot of travel and business with, but their prison system is slightly different, and the way that they think about prisoners is slightly different. And so what we were asked to do is to insert RFID under prisoners' skin and run a middleware solution that would track these people basically for the rest of their lives. And it was at a time when the company I was with was struggling very, very much in the marketplace. This would have meant a huge amount, hundreds of millions of dollars to win this government contract for this thing. And everybody was gung-ho, and this is great, and we're going to get this data, and we're going to get this stuff, and we're going to be like the new prison of the future. And I couldn't sleep, and I kind of put the data together, and I put together kind of what my projections out for the future. So I just kind of used business case modeling and said, this is one way it could go, this is one way, and this is one way. And got together and talked to some people, actually Rajiv Madhwani, who's one of the founders of Google when he was still alive, and sat down and said, this to me feels like a universal ethics problem. I know it is legal. I know that it is profitable. And I know that our technology is capable of doing this, and we can even tell ourselves that we can secure this data appropriately. But it still, to me, feels morally and ethically wrong. And so I took all that data, and I sat down with the CEO, who was kind enough to take the meeting with me, and we didn't do the deal. And I felt really good about it, and there were a lot of knives in my back, and the salespeople were not my friend for a while. But it still was the right thing to do, even though it hurt at the time and it cost us dollars at the time. It saved, and since then, even my biggest detractors have come back to me and said, I'm glad we didn't do that deal.
Seval, what are your guiding principles for good management?
Well, that's surely one of them. What Kim was referring to. And I think my biggest guiding principle has always been about courage. It's always been about courage to to face the tough challenges. I think we get every day maybe bombarded with about 320 decision-making opportunities. And if we look and we sort of progressively track those opportunities, as small as they are, as insignificant as they all make up the sum path of our human experience. And a lot of times in situations where the tough decisions are being asked of us to make, we don't make them. And that results in very, very strong pitfalls, both as industries, as companies, as industries, and even to the human health of our country and our global society. So one of the really important guiding factors as a leader, I think, is to really instill upon your workforce and yourself, let's make the tough decisions. So that's kind of a testament of what you were just sharing. I think the other important thing I'd like to talk about is failing. And we can sit up here and tell you how great we are and how wonderful we are, and regardless of our roadmap, we made it. The truth is, the difference between you all sitting in the room and us is probably we've just failed more than you have. Yes. And that's the part that doesn't get talked about, but that's the part that, again, is really important, both in our own human acumen, but also as we go about making our decisions on a day-to-day basis. I always tell my team, let's fail fast. If it's not going to work, let's prototype it, let's beta test it, let's launch it in a small, sort of a confined environment, and fail fast and get a learning cycle from it. Because learning cycles are far more important than building a business that's just not going to make it. So I think, fear of failure is not something, as a human being, I tolerate in my team and in myself and in my company. So, and I push back on every single person that pushes me and says there's too much risk, and I can assure you that there's a lot of debates in the automotive industry about risk, because we're dealing with safety. There's 1.2 million lethal crashes a year. We should have zero tolerance for that. In any other world, that's an epidemic, right? So self-driving, autonomous, highly automated, whatever you want to call it, needs to happen, because otherwise we are losing 1.2 million lives a year to this crazy thing called traffic crashes. So we have to be bold, We have to risk, as vaccines are created, we have to risk having the casualty to make the big difference in life, and we have to not have a fear of failure. And I think all these things are, to some degree, gendered as women because of the fact that we're kind of given this DNA when we're born, and as we become mature, and as we have families and become mothers, and I think men are very good at it too. But I think it's really important to realize and recognize the fact that that's part of our consistency, and we're good at it. So let's take those great role capabilities and inject them into the workforce and really change the world as we know it.
Thank you. So we've got 15 minutes before we go to questions, and I'm going to now move to the last topic about career, and particularly about mentoring and mentors. And so let me start with you, Kim. How important is mentorship, either from women or men, not necessarily just from women, in helping young women succeed in technology?
So I think there's two things. There's mentorship and there's sponsorship. And they both play a role, and you need both. And I sort of define mentorships are people that help you learn skills that they're skilled at something, and you're trying to learn from their experience, and they're helping you. And that's necessary but not sufficient. You also need sponsorship, which is where somebody is advocating for you, and it could be you never even actually know or hear the conversation. But the world's a big place, and sponsorship happens when someone knows you, they know your track record, they understand your goals and objectives, which means you have to speak your goals and objectives. And they find that meets a need that they're aware of, whether it be in their area or in someone else's area, and they're willing to make that connection for you. So it's often women lack sponsorship versus mentorship. And so the irony, though, is that you can't just go ask somebody, hey, will you be my sponsor? Because it comes from having a strong relationship with somebody. And hopefully, they've moved on to something and you've moved on to something, and you retain that. And that's where opportunities come from. In fact, I landed at Intel because I had worked with Intel for 5 years before I ever worked here, and helped introduce leading edge technology into other companies. So people knew me and then sponsored me into the role that I landed in. So it's complicated, but I think you need both.
Michelle, did you ever have a mentor? And would you attribute your success in part to the mentoring you received?
So I don't think I've ever had a formal mentor, but I've had an array of mentors. So Rajiv Madhwani was a big mentor in my life, but we probably saw each other maybe once a year when he was still alive. I definitely I've had a blend, and quite honestly, because I've spent my whole career in high tech, either as at a law firm or in bio or in high tech. A lot of men along the way, a lot of women. I think it is this blend of sponsorship and mentorship, because sometimes you get into these really enviable positions where you are capable of doing a lot of different things, but you're so used to being capable at them that you forget to choose. That's when a mentor is helpful. You sit down and you go, you know me, like, where should I go? Do I start my own company? Do I go for this job? Blah, blah, blah. That's a mentor. That's a menschy, kind of yummy, delicious conversation. It's like a girlfriend on acid. Good acid, and if you're a child, don't use acid, it's a bad drug. Epidurals are good, drugs are bad. That's a whole different story. But a sponsor is someone that you really do have to cultivate. I think that's exactly right. I've had people come to me and say, oh, can you sponsor me, or can you recommend me? And I can, to a point that I know, but for women to cultivate sponsors, we have to do something that is unnatural, which is to actually claim our own success. So you have to, once you've succeeded at someone, don't assume that everybody knows that it was you. So you have to kind of go back to that person and go, hey, you know, that thing I told you I was going to execute on, I went out there and I actually did it, and it's done, and here's what I learned from it, and here's da-da-da-da-da-da. And what you're doing is you're communicating and you're kind of rehearsing that success for the next time that you need it. And it's something that I found to be, you know, pretty difficult in my own career, and I'm just starting to figure out the whole sponsorship thing, because I've had the accidental one that I didn't know they were my sponsor, and then they were like, hey, by the way, I said you should have this job, or hey, by the way, this happened behind your back, and that was great. But intentional sponsorship is something you really, it's beyond networking. It's not something you can do on LinkedIn. You have to intentionally go out and show yourself worthy to a sponsor. Sometimes they happen organically. But usually it's something you really have to pay some attention to and spend some time getting to know that person and letting that person be a little vulnerable and let that person know what your desires are and where you think you're going, and let them be honest with you as well and say, here's where you're weak. Here's where you need to develop if you're going to go over here.
So,
Did you say menchie?
Menchie.
I think I just learned another vocabulary word that I can use for the next 10 years and claim you authored that. I like that.
final question before we go to Q&A. We have 10 minutes, and I'm going to have each of you field this question, starting with Seval. This is Women Who Inspire, and we have 3 very successful women sitting up here, and I'm hoping that they're inspiring some of you sitting in the audience, particularly the students. And so I'm going to ask each of you, what tips or advice do you have for the audience? It's not really fair because Kim and Michelle get to think about this.
I think my inspiration for you all who are listening is to find something you really are excited about. And that can be really anything. It doesn't have to be within your domain experience or your educational background, but something that really gets you up and excited. Because if you stick to your knitting, if you stick to the way that you're indigenously creative about something that excites you, you won't do wrong. You'll find paths to success. I mean, success kind of evolves and comes. And I can't sit here and say, you know, I'm successful or I'm not successful. I'm happy, though. I'm happy waking up every morning knowing that I get to go to work, and I get to work in an exciting environment, and I can be impactful, and I can have discussions and exciting conversations with people in and out of my industry, and I have the ability and the empowerment to do things because I have the vested responsibility of people that are my peers and supervisors. So I think if you can walk away feeling like I'm excited about this one thing that I love doing, stick to it, focus on it without distraction, and pour yourself into it for the next 2 years of your life. Because if anything, you might end up not making it, whatever that is, but you'll have spent 2 years of your life knowing what it's like to be focused and powerfully persuaded by your own conscientious and your own love of wanting to do something. Because passion is far more creative and far more, contagious than anything else I can think of. I was once being interviewed for a position, and they asked me if I had to design a portal and create anything that I would want to create as a theme, what would it be? What would you design your own portal? And I didn't even think about the answer. It came so intuitively to me that I shocked myself even after the interview. I said, love. I said, if I could create something that within 5 minutes of me waking up would gravitate me to that, whatever it was, my phone, a page on a site, something, if I could create that association with love, that would be almost like a supersonic magical moment. So I think we all know what that is individually, and we just need to figure out a way to get it out there in an expressive way that other people can share.
Kim?
I would say 2 things. So speak up. You can't accomplish anything if you are not vocal and you're not inquisitive. So, and I know often people have a hard time figuring out, how do I break into the conversation? Or maybe I don't know everything that they know, so I won't say it now. generally, those are very bad voices in your head that have to be squelched. So you need to speak up and figure out how that works for you. But then I would say lift others up. So this, business is a team sport. And when you lift others up, they will lift you up. And the further you go, the more and more that's true. That it's a team sport. You can't do it alone. And so you should cultivate relationships that are positive and productive for you and for everyone that you're having a relationship with.
So now this is hard now because all the good stuff's been taken. So I'm going to give the opposite of speak up, which I totally believe in, have to really consciously practice myself. Speaking up and asking for what I want is to listen. I think we wait our turn to speak far too often rather than really taking in. And especially when you are in a position when you, because being inquisitive to me is everything. That's like the inventor's engine. And never waste a moment. Well, if you don't have the Amazon Fresh service, you're waiting in line at the grocery store. Never waste a moment thinking about how maybe this could be more efficient or more beautiful, or my 8-year-old has an inventor's journal, and her thing of the month is alarm clocks, and her latest alarm clock has pancakes that flip into your mouth and water that goes on your head, and it shines a light. And I was like, this is really interesting. And so her name is Quincy. So we sat down and I was like, so, why all this stuff? And to tease out like her specs for the system really helped me. So the next, she was like, well, you're hungry in the morning and I'm tired and I need to shower anyway. So the water and the cold, and it shocks me. And if I'm shocked and I'm out of bed, I said, won't you be in a bad mood? Oh, but there's a towel. She had answers for everything. So I went in the next day and I was reviewing a system for privacy engineering, and it was kind of the same thing of like, well, we're collecting this data about our customers and through the mobile device, and we're doing this, and and I said, okay, well, why are you doing this? And I thought, you haven't listened. Are you hungry in the morning? Do you need to be woken up? How do we delight you more? Everything has a function. Listen to my 8-year-old. She's going to design the system better than you are. So listen, take your advice everywhere. Don't forget the artists and the musicians and the people who are wired completely different from yourself, because I think that to me is the love engine. Those people inspire me. Like, I am the most clumsy, non-musical person. It's like magic when people do what just comes naturally to them. And what I do is magic to them. And so I think that's the magic of it all. Listen really well, follow your heart, which sounds very trite, but I haven't spoken to an elderly person who didn't say that was exactly their number one piece of advice, is really follow your heart. Don't do things for your parents, don't do things for your spouse, don't do things for, don't live as a narcissist. Those people are most of the male CEOs, but just
Who are bad at
There are a couple of
relationships.
them out
not
here.
this one, not this one. You have to be a brave man to come to this event.
And bad at relationships.
Yes.
Yes. Okay, we are right on time. And so now we're going to open up the mics and go to the audience for questions. There's 2 mics in the aisles here. Step up to an aisle, step up to a microphone, and we'll call on you, and anything goes there.
Thank God there were some volunteers. I once worked somewhere where they actually started calling you out and saying, you go up.
I can do that as well, so that's no problem.
I make them do karaoke.
First of all, very insightful about women hiring or interviewing women. I've been at Intel 23 years, and my first round at college was a woman. And I turned to the lady sitting next to me, who I respect very much, worked with a number of years. And I said, was your first round a woman? And she said, yeah. Yeah, it was. So very insightful, interesting. But the question I have is about what information is private. Because I talk to my teenage daughter and I say, you have to be careful about what data is collected and goes up in the cloud. And I'm an athlete, an amateur athlete, and I'm very private, right, about, what my heart rate is or how many minutes I exercise, things like this. And she said, Mom, why do you care? It's for the collective good, right, where they have this information that some 50-some-year-old woman has this heart rate and this level of exercise. Why is that? They have a completely different perspective than us. So my question is really, who's right and does it matter?
So it's so there's lots of research on this that's really, so I will point you to a book by Dana Boyd. It's really wonderful. It's called It's Complicated, and it talks about some deep research she's done with teenagers and their relationship to data. I'll give you my short version answer, which is, I've heard 1,000,000 times that privacy is dead, million times. If it is, that it's the sexiest, most sparkly zombie on the planet right now, because it keeps coming up. And I do a lot of teaching in schools. We have an online safety program, and after the Newtown shooting happened, I went to 27 different schools. That was kind of my personal mission that year. And thousands of kids, they have strategies on how to be safe. They organize. Ask that same daughter when was the last time she had a poop and what its shape was. Mum's the word. Who's her crush? If every one of our employees at Intel kept their data as safe as a 13-year-old girl's crush, they wouldn't need us anymore in security.
That's great.
They do care about information. They don't have your judgment necessarily, but they do care about their curation.
Yeah, but I would question you to think back, because we go through waves of change, right? So I grew up, and I'll assert you probably were like me, where phone calls were private. You went to a phone booth, you shut the door, and you had a private conversation, right? And now, you know, I hear lots of things of other people's phone calls that I think, really? So it's not just your daughter or the teens, right? We have changed too. These are societal shifts, and they continue to shift. And so whether it's a pendulum and it swings back, or, you know, you don't know. But if you follow the legislation, it looks like the pendulum is coming back.
So we'll take the next question, please.
Hello. So I think the context of promoting technical careers for women and helping them to be successful has to do with breaking some stereotypes, like changing some culture in a certain way. And my question is, what men can do differently to help women resist this previous cultural baggage and enable them to strive in technical careers. Like in particular, my wife is now studying computer science in a college. Like what I can do to help her be more engaged with this and also be more successful. Like my strategy was, okay, treat her as a man in anything that relates to education and work, but maybe this is not a perfect strategy, because then I'm not really taking advantage of some woman-specific trait of character. And
So here's what my advice would be. So men and women communicate differently for lots of scientifically proven reasons. It's not right or wrong. It's not good or bad. It's different. Investing in understanding those differences can be very, very powerful. So I'll mention relationships. So women tend to be more relationship. It tends to be more of a feminine trait to be more relationship focused, where men tend to be more task focused. So that's why when I want to go to the mall with my husband to buy something, he thinks we're going to the mall to buy something. We are clearly going to the mall to spend time together. It's about the relationship, right? And when you know that, you can work through it. If you don't know that, you can't work through it. And so there's lots of research on gender communication. And I really emphasize, it's not right or wrong, it's not good or bad. It's just different, and when you understand the differences, you can work through them to positive outcomes.
And you showed up here. You are good at relationships. And seriously, just having support sometimes at home is really fantastic. I married an engineer, and I have to have this conversation with him. Clearly, we're here to spend time together. I have to rinse and repeat that quite a bit, but it's just your being here, and tell her when you go home. Is she here? Hiding out in the audience? Is she here?
here.
So when you go home, tell her you even stood up at the mic and you asked a question at a Women's Innovation Summit because you love her, and that's huge.
Thank you. Go to the other side of the room.
That's great. I'm Diane McGilvray. I'm from Northeastern University, and I have a number of questions that were submitted by our students and a few that some of our students in the audience have asked. So I could be here all night if we need to keep going. But one of the themes that seems to have emerged that our students would like to know from all three of you is that you all talked about the importance of failure and quick learning cycles. But could you give us a few examples maybe of times that that actually happened?
Oh my God. There's so
Student
many.
questions, not mine.
Yeah. I mean, I think when I recall, first being on the self-driving car project, and having a small group of engineers and talking about taking this to the public road. There was a lot of inconsistency in thoughts about why we would take it to the public road. Why would we even bother thinking about taking it out of a testing environment? Because nobody had, and we felt that it was more important to get the learning cycles of being on public roads and protecting by having a rigorous program that required 2 engineers to be constantly in the vehicle's driver and passenger seat, that required a constant remote visualization of where the vehicles were. We safeguarded for this approach, but it was really, I think, kind of very, very necessary to be able to test on public roads, both in terms of building conscientiousness in the public and building conscientiousness in the regulatory environment, and also helping us get the learning cycles. So that was an example where we felt that there was a risk. We felt that this program could fail, but we needed to fail fast if that was the case. And we took the risk, and it ended up being one of I think, the most important projects of our generation, if not the century. There were other examples where I've been in process of developing a search engine that was slightly more avant-garde than what Google search is doing. It was doing social search, and it failed. We ran out of money, but at the same time, Google saw from an article that I had written in the MIT Technology Review about the importance of your friends' influence on your decisions being more important than objective influences on decisions. This is called a referral mechanism, which ended up being hugely valuable to Google search, and they actually bought our company based on that whole technology and criteria. So even if we failed in the domain of not being able to have a company succeed on its own, we were hugely successful in having that group of engineers be transported over to Google and run Android and improve search quality and do a lot of other really enterprising things in the last 2 years for the mobility platform. So again, failing fast is something that is, you can't measure that, but you can provide sustenance to your development path, both engineering and product development, if you're able to assume that risk early on in the project.
Kim, do you have an example of a fast failure?
So I'd just say it's 2004, 2005. I had a senior fellow, so our top engineers come to me. I was at EDS then, and explained to me this thing called cloud computing, and that we should change our business model around cloud computing. And I thought I knew more than he did, and I said, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. We actually already have that in the mainframe, and here's why. Here's how this works. And I didn't listen well enough to what he was saying to pick up the nuance on what. So 3 years go by, and lo and behold, cloud computing is the next greatest thing. And but the problem with not listening in that environment is that we didn't change our business model, and we ended up being bought because we couldn't afford to not be bought. Right? We couldn't. Our expenses, capital markets had shut down. Our expenses were growing. We had to be bought, and that's what you learn in technology, is that every generation of technology causes a rethinking of your business model. And if you're not willing to ride that curve, then you risk obsolescence. And so that was really powerful, I think.
Do you have a question on this side of the room?
Yeah, so first off, thank you for sharing those incredible stories. Awesome. And the insights about the career. So my question is more on the disruption. I've always been working on projects which have always been disruptive, whether I've been in big companies or startups. So the question has to maybe, it's asking your comment on Elon Musk and Bill Gates' recent comments about, machines taking over and how that's going to make us dumb. So just curious what your thoughts are since you are working on the ITS, on the cars and stuff.
I mean, I don't know if you're referring to singularity, where
Exactly.
where
I think to some extent it goes to singularity.
I mean, if you think about all the well, thank you for the question. It's an exciting question to think about. I have a lot of respect, by the way, for Elon Musk. And for Bill Gates, for his work that he's doing, I think, with education and with healthcare right now through his foundation. I think it's really important to see the perspective of history and industry. I mean, if you look at steel, what steel was in the 1980s, steel was one of the largest, most important benefactors of the industrial age, right? Then we had gold before that. We had oil after that. We've constantly been reinventing our machinery, our tooling, our skill sets. In fact, the basic reason why we have, unfortunately, such poor education results in this country is because we haven't been keeping up with our skill set retooling for our human educational apparatus. And I think the faster we understand that, creating self-driving cars doesn't mean that taxi drivers go out of business. What it means is the skill modifications that are required. Maybe the taxi drivers become fleet managers. Maybe they become logistics providers. Maybe they become remote engineers required to serve the vehicles in operative, remote circumstances. There is a wealth of other skill sets that are going to be derived as a result of changing and transforming industries through automation, through piloting, autopiloting, through systems that involve the computer's more active control over basic things. I mean, to some degree, the human shouldn't be doing the basic tasks anymore, right? I mean, we should be moving up higher and higher into human machine learning, more and more into artificial intelligence, more into predictive learning, more into being able to synthesize and communicate with computers as if they could sort of, I'm not going to say read our minds, but know what we're planning on doing that day by knowing what our calendar is, by knowing what day of the week it is, by knowing where we're going in the vehicle. It can kind of synthesize that we're going to work on a Friday at 5, or we're coming home on a Friday at 5 o'clock, or we're going to a tennis match on Saturday, because it knows patterns, it recognizes patterns. So I think the short answer to your question is we have to start training ourselves and our young generations of students coming out to think about, again, where the technology ball is being thrown and what skills need to be developed. And if we could have predicted and planned for the Internet of Everything, we could have set up ourselves for fast-forward success in creating jobs and skills in labor in areas where we could have artificial intelligence by now or image recognition by now. And I'm thinking of all the incredible new technologies, mapping. Mapping shouldn't be something that's downloaded. Mapping shouldn't be something that resides offline or online. Mapping should be real-time created. So as I'm going somewhere, that mapping should be unfolded in my car because it knows road topography, it knows GPS, it knows where the road is. And I just think that if you think about it, and if you just be a little curious about linking the dots, you can see where the technology is going, and you can basically develop your own skill sets to get there.
So we have time for 2 more questions. I'll take one on each side. Why don't we start with this side of the aisle?
Good evening. First, a very quick comment. As a father of 2 young daughters, husband of a very talented and intelligent wife, and a colleague of ridiculously talented women at Northeastern, I just want to thank you for confirming that I'm not crazy and being inspired every day by the women in my life, so thank you. My question comes from a very selfish place, which is one from a higher education perspective, and interested to know your thoughts on what higher ed institutions and companies can be doing to enhance women in the workforce in the STEM fields. Very simple question, but complicated. Thank you.
So I'll dive in. I have 2 young daughters as well. You are crazy for living with us, but we thank you. I think it is so interesting to me as I'm watching, particularly my 13-year-old, and asking her, because she is interested in Python and she's interested in Scratch and all these things, and all of a sudden, that's like a secret. Like the cool girls don't do that anymore. And so it's really interesting and kind of frustrating to me to go, hey, here you have like, you know, your Uncle James Gosling, like invented Java, like you should be really excited about this stuff, you know? So I think it's interesting, and not just in STEM. I think what a lot of women have is this whole imposter syndrome. I think men have it to an extent too, but we are socialized to not brag about ourselves or be overt or not fit in or be loud or not kind of be that social sand. And I think in higher ed in particular, where you still do have this kind of hierarchical in the traditional classroom learning, and I'm looking at flipped classrooms like Minerva and some of these other experience-based classrooms, I think it is so critical to build those confidence skills, those communication skills, and some realism skills. So my graduate students now, I tell them as much about, you know, this is how we're doing the systems architecture, but I'm telling them, here's the thing. That guy over there in logistics, where we're saying we're gonna disrupt him because we're gonna privacy automate this over there, he's gonna be a pain in your nookus. I'm gonna tell you how you're gonna argue with him. We need to tell women not just the linear answer, but how do we actually socialize without being overly aggressive, without being an artificial wannabe man? How do we be feminine? How do we use our talents to the best and leverage those relationships that are, you know, biology tells us a lot of things, and one of the things it loves is diverse interfaces. So I think those fundamental skills are really, really critical for women entering the workplace. We need to not, Google has all the facts. We need to be creative thinkers, and that is inherently an advantage for the way women are kind of designed today. I don't know if that's an answer. It's kind of a non-answer.
Thank you. Last question. We have time for one more.
Okay. I apologize in advance for my formulation of this question because, okay, but I am a part of the youth community.
Women shouldn't do. You don't start with apology.
Then,
Just start over.
I retract my apology and. But I am a part of the youth population, as you can see, and you said that you wanted to live longer so that you could view the technology evolving fast. What do you think we should look out for in order to not make technology disruptive in the negative sense of the word? And also, I have a part 2, and that is that as a young woman, I'm still like formulating who I am. What characteristics do you think I should pinpoint and strengthen to become successful in such a fast-paced society, also male-dominated?
Wow.
Small problems.
Okay.
Okay, I'll take it. I think articulation is very important. Being able to communicate very effectively and very definitively, especially in an engineering or in a technical program management. I think I see people not be as effective as they should or could be because they, for some reason, are not able to articulate. Even though they're right, most likely, in certain instances, they can't debate the stream of consciousness or stream of logic behind their argument. I see them becoming weaker in their progressive ability to push forward, influence others, and persuade a decision. So I would spend a lot of crafty time thinking about how to articulate exactly what you're trying to say using as little or few words as possible. It really is something that I'd love to see an educational class about. Too many times we concentrate on debate, but I don't see, or public speaking, but I don't see that many courses in articulation. Prove a concept, proof of concept with 50 words or less. That's something that's almost like an engineering tool when you're asked to write a code, by shortening 100 lines, right?
Maybe Twitter will help us. 140 characters.
That's
Get it out.
That's it. I'll let my colleagues comment.
No, I would agree with that. I would just say that it's a team sport, like I said, right? So it's find your role in that team, and how do you make the team better? Just think about that, right? Because everyone's unique, and you bring great talent to the table, but what do you do differently to help make the team better?
And one more thing is well, first of all, don't apologize again. That was a smart question, and you deserve to ask it. So continue standing up and asking your question. And then I think as you start out in particular, don't be afraid to write yourself some notes. You don't have to do everything spontaneously. So for example, what happens a lot, especially in engineering meetings, I see this all the time. A woman says, well, I have an idea about this feature. And then kind of the conversation goes on, and then Joe over here goes, I have an idea about this feature. And he repeats what she says. If you have written down a catchphrase, you don't have to be rude about it. Just go, Joe, I'm so excited that you liked my idea, and here's what else I think. Make sure you claim your space. You don't need to be rude about it. You have to be kind to everyone around you. But when you see these patterns happen, and when you feel yourself saying things with a question mark on the end, or coming up and apologizing, even turn that into a joke for yourself and go, oh, I apologize that I just apologized, and I'm only apologizing to me because I'm not going to do that anymore. These are the things you don't have to do on the spot. Make yourself a list of things you want to work on, and then work on them.
I want to just adjust one thing, because I don't think we answered her part one of her question. Can I answer that quickly?
Sure.
You talked about how do you not fear technology, I think. If you look at the history, if you do a study of the history of people who have made groundbreaking changes in technology, there's definitely a disconnect between evolutionary change and revolutionary change. And by far, the revolutionary impactors have interestingly not come from educational backgrounds in technology and sciences. So just because you haven't had a formal educational background in the technologies, don't fear them. By far, you have a unique perspective that you can offer that, as my peers said, can somehow reformulate a very scientific project into something that could be very commercially viable. So don't fear technology just because you haven't had that formal educational background.
Yeah.
So that's all the time we have this evening. I hope everybody enjoyed the session. I actually would like to thank President Aoun and all of the folks here at Northeastern for sponsoring this session tonight. The most important part of the evening right now is about 30 minutes that we'll have to network with coffee out in the lobby. So please do stick around. I'm sure these ladies will be there as well. So if you have more questions, then they'll be available for you to ask. Again, thank you very much.